with an emergency episode of The Truth About the Martial Arts Business. This interview with the lease coach, Dale Willington, was slapped together as fast as possible in order to get this critical information out to those of you concerned about how you're going to pay your rent in the midst of this pandemic. So be aware. There are some production issues with Dale's mic, but we decided to ignore that in order to get this to you faster. Dale also has a fantastic offer to help you negotiate with your landlord at the end of the show, so stick around for that. Welcome to The Truth About the Martial Arts Business, brought to you by Pasco County EDC and the Martial Arts Teachers Association at martialartsteachers.com. I'm your host, John Graydon. This is a no-holds-barred, unflinching look at the business of martial arts. We pull back the curtains to reveal what is real and what is outdated fantasy. Our goal is to engage, entertain, and educate on how the martial arts can help you, even if you only use a belt to keep your pants up. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and share with your friends and leave a good review. Enjoy the show. With the coronavirus pandemic blanketing the world, many owners can't conduct group classes for at least the next month or so. This creates a beehive of complexity and questions that we've never faced before. Central to that is, of course, how am I going to make rent? What are my options? To get the answers to these questions and more, we again turn to the lease coach, Dale Willington. Dale is America's #1 authority on commercial lease negotiations for small businesses just like yours. He's spoken to tens of thousands of tenants across the USA and Canada, and he's written a number of books and courses, including leasing seminars on CD for commercial tenants. Dale, thanks so much for joining us again on The Truth About the Martial Arts Business. We know that for most martial arts school owners, their biggest expense, at least until their salary becomes as much or more, is their rent. So let's start by establishing a base. In normal times, what percentage of gross should an owner shoot for?
John, there are variables, but I like to give a concise answer. So I would estimate approximately 20% maximum. Across the board, like if you're talking about, all tenants in general, retail tenants, restaurant tenants, the number is closer to 10%. But because in the martial arts industry, you're not selling a widget, you're selling a service, you can typically afford to pay a bit more rent. So if you're grossing $20,000 a month, you should be able to afford to pay about $4,000 a month in gross rent.
Gotcha, and that's what I thought. Obviously, grosses are down and rent hasn't changed. The old saying is that even when business stops, rent continues. So I know you help a lot of martial arts schools and fitness centers. What are you hearing out there right now?
Well, a lot of panic, a lot of confusion. Martial arts school owners are such genuine, good-hearted people. I mean, I know dozens and dozens and dozens of them, and they don't like what's happening. They want to work. They want to serve their students. But of course, many of them are being legislated to actually close because of the pandemic and social distancing and that type of thing. So there's a lot of emotional panic. A lot of them are reaching out to their landlords and scrambling and just uncertain what to do. I can only imagine they're also getting calls from students and parents saying, well, if your school's not open, we're going to need our money back. So they're getting pressure from both ends.
And to tell you, I don't know if Zoom is a public company or not, but if you have stock in Zoom, it's zooming right now.
That's right. 2.5 million new subscribers last week.
Holy cow. So, the president has asked that there be no eviction of residents, home residents, people that rent for their home. But what about business tenants? Are guys, you think, facing the prospect of being evicted?
No, I really don't, and I'll tell you why. Prior to 1993, I used to work for landlords. I was a shopping mall manager, a leasing rep, and so I've been the lease coach now for 27 years. But when I used to work for landlords aren't as quick to evict as tenants think they are. And the truth is, right now, the landlord doesn't want your space back. Nobody else wants to lease your space. So right now, eviction should not be a great concern. The big question, John, is going to be, how much rent should I pay during this recession? How should I dialogue with my landlord. Those are the uncertainties they're facing.
And we're going to get into that in detail. But what you just said triggered a memory of mine. Banks, landlords often look at the spaces in their plazas not so much as the rent that they can get, but the loan that they can get from the bank. Is that accurate?
Well, some landlords have high ratio mortgages, and other landlords are mortgage free. So some landlords are in a comfortable position. They can let you go for a couple of months without paying. Other landlords are going to have to go back to their bank and arrange for some interim assistance for them on their mortgage.
So this becomes the reality for us about a stimulus package.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are guys asking you? I know every circumstance is different, so if you can help kind of categorize them and guide them a little bit, that would be great.
When I get a phone call from a martial arts school owner, they are typically saying, I'm closed, I've been forced to close, social distancing. I'm going to call my landlord and tell him that I can't pay any rent this coming month. And if he doesn't help me, I may not make it or survive at all. And that's a bit of a mistake. The approach should be to contact the landlord and assume and ask the landlord what is the landlord's plan, okay? Before you ask the landlord for any rent assistance, you want to say to the landlord, have you developed an assistance plan for your tenants? See, many of these landlords have hundreds, if not thousands of tenants. They are very sophisticated. And so they're not just sitting back, watching this happen. They're putting together a plan. Okay. So really, before you tell the landlord what dire straits you're in and what, the fact that you've had 4 sleepless nights, go to them with the assumption that they've got a plan and they're going to roll something out to help their tenants and listen to that. Now, what I'm hearing in reality is a lot of them are getting sort of waylaid. They're being said, yeah, we're working on something. We'll get back to you. But the tenant needs to keep their eye on the calendar because we're approaching the end of the month or you're going to pay your rent on the first of the month. You don't want to do that. And so some landlords will stall thinking, well, we'll get one more rent payment out of all of our tenants because we'll stall them until the beginning of the month after they've all paid their rent.
Oh, that's so insightful, outstanding. Because, what you said was it's a mistake to come with your situation. That's like going into a negotiation and being the first one to name the price. So stall until, we're talking real time right now. It is March 24th. We've got a week until rent is due again. Most guys are probably lucky they're 31 days in March and that this was a leap year. So they're stalling out. Following this example, it's getting down to the first of the month. You're suggesting school owners should be in constant contact with their landlords for updates.
Well, yes, but within reason. You want to consider that, first of all, who are you going to contact? Typically, it's your property manager, the person that you would normally talk to about your rent or your lease renewal is the person you should reach out to. Okay. And you want to do that by email, scheduling a phone call. Okay, so the ideal scenario is you email your property manager, you reintroduce yourself, whether you know them or they don't know you. Right. They could be a new property manager. And I'd like to give you a phone call tomorrow to discuss if the landlord has a rent assistance plan. Then get on the phone and actually talk to them. Don't do all of this by email and certainly don't be texting them. Okay? But the professional courtesy in this industry, if you want to actually have a conversation with someone, the appropriate way to do that is by emailing and requesting it. Okay? Can I call you tomorrow at 2:00 or what time is good for you? And the property manager emails back and it's 3:30, call me at this number. Then they're expecting your call. And then you can open up with that question, is there going to be a plan? Now, most of them will stall you or say, yeah, there's something coming down in the next couple of days. They won't give you a definitive answer on the phone. So when you thank them for that, you hang up the call, and the next day you send them another email saying, I'd like to follow up with you on Friday. Okay. Gotcha. And you go back and talk to them again on Friday, because you're probably going to come to a point where you finally have to say to them, well, you understand we're closed. We've been forced to close. Rent money's in short supply. And I always start by saying, Mr. Property Manager, what do you recommend, or what do you think I should do?
That is a great question.
Okay. And some of them will come back and say, well, don't worry about paying the rent. We'll work something out. We'll get back to you. Some of them will say, well, you better pay your rent. That's what your lease agreement says. This isn't our problem. You want to know if you've got a fight on your hand, or if it's going to be, kind of cooperative to work with them. Ultimately, everything has to be very well documented, but I certainly don't want to see you paying any rent on the first of the month if your business is closed.
And when you say closed, just to define closed, there's a difference, I think, between shutting the doors over this period of time and closing the business down completely.
Yeah, pardon me. I mean temporarily closed, where you're expecting to reopen in 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, but for now, you're not allowed to. You're just not allowed to have that many people in one room. So
it's really kind of a downtime. Yeah, and that's I'm telling you, it's really fascinating to watch these guys teach their classes on Facebook and on Zoom, and it's been very interesting. So would you say that the situation you just described is pretty much the norm of what you're hearing?
Let me give you a real life example. I'm going to open up this. I got an email. So on behalf of one of my martial arts clients, I should have printed this. On behalf of one of my martial arts clients, I reached out to a landlord, a property manager, and to basically put this into perspective. And I'm going to share with you his actual response, his actual email response, because this is really a day-to-day. And for this particular client, I'm right in the middle of negotiating his lease renewal. So we've already been in contact with the property manager on a weekly or monthly basis to discuss the renewal, and now suddenly we have this. We'll see how it plays out. The sad, John, I want to put something into perspective. Landlords rate and value tenants differently. For example, a dentist or a franchise tenant would have a very high rating. They tend to be more of a golden tenant. A martial arts studio is a low value tenant to a landlord. They're not the preferred tenant, but if they'll pay the rent and they'll, be good, landlords will take their money. So landlords treat different tenants differently, is my point.
My mother was a realtor, and when I started martial arts in the mid-1970s, she was named the Florida Realtor of the Year for the NAR, and she told me over and over again. She actually, at the request of my instructor, looked at his credit rating to see if he could get a better lease, and she says, John, you don't want to go in this business.
Yeah.
She said that over and over again, but I was addicted, and here I am.
Okay, so what I'm going to read to you is from a property manager who I've had a lot of contact with over the past few months. He knows who I am. I know who he is, and I basically said to him, does the landlord have an assistance plan, a rent assistance plan for the tenants in this property? And this is what he wrote back to me. He said, we are in the process of solidifying exactly what the assistance will be. See, they're stalling. Okay. In the meantime, I would recommend he talk to his insurer to discuss any business interruption insurance coverage he may have. Now, business interruption insurance is very, very expensive. Most tenants do not carry business interruption insurance, and it's not even clear if it would cover them in this particular type of situation. But that's not a bad thing for the property manager to say. The property manager is saying, go back, at least check with your insurance to see if you've got any coverage. Then he says, even if the insurer denies coverage, it's important that he file a claim in order to start the paper trail that will be necessary to get government assistance. Okay?
Great.
Yeah, exactly. Now, but we're still not talking rent yet. Then he goes on to say he should also contact the SBA, the Small Business Loan Association, the SBA, as they are the main source of small business support where government and financial assistance is concerned. And then he signed off, presumably going to get back to me in a couple of days. But so we've received no concrete answer. So if I don't get a response from him by Friday, I'll be following up with him on Friday and say, well, you understand the tenant just does not have the ability to pay the rent on the first of the month. They don't have the ability to do that. What do you recommend? Should we, what do you want to see? How can we stay in good communication with you? Okay. Because the important thing is when I was a property manager, when I was a commercial property manager, John, and I'd be managing, let's say 85 tenants in one building. In any given month, 15 tenants wouldn't pay their rent. Okay? Wow. So I had to start phoning them. My number one job as the property manager was rent collection. So on the second day of the month, because the rent was due on the first, on the second day of the month, I would start phoning tenants. Now, many of the tenants would say, oh, did we forget to send that down? We'll run it down this afternoon. Oh, I mailed a check from head office. Yes, we're going to pay you in a couple of days. We're waiting for a few things to clear. But a few tenants would avoid me. A few tenants would not communicate with me. So they haven't paid their rent, and now they become invisible. Okay? That's what you do not want to do, because if you force the property manager to chase you, then they'll punish you for that because you're wasting their time. And so you want to be proactive. You want to have emails and phone calls in advance so they can't say, oh, the tenant's disappeared. I don't know where the tenant is. He's not communicating with us. No, exactly the opposite. We can't get him out of our face.
That's great. I mean, it's really showing good intentions, letting them know that it's on your mind. I can't imagine, oh, I forgot rent. You had never heard that one before. Exactly.
But like I said, I don't, eviction is not really what they're going to talk about. They don't want your space back. If a landlord has a martial arts tenant, and let's say, like a lot of my martial arts clients want to go in fairly strong grocery anchored plazas, and that's where most tenants want to be, and that's where the higher rents are. If they've already accepted you into a strong grocery anchored plaza, it's only because they couldn't find a better tenant than you that wanted the space. Because by far, they would rather have a retailer or a chiropractor or a dentist or a Dairy Queen or restaurant. Okay? So they don't really want your space back. That's not the jeopardy here.
Interesting. Okay, so what are the options? Deferment to the end of the lease, skip it for a month. What are the options that these guys might be able to suggest or consider if they get offered by the landlord?
Where tenants get into trouble is they don't understand the jargon. So if the landlord comes back and says, you know what, we're going to give you 3 months of rent relief, the tenant goes, well, that sounds really good. When the landlord uses the word rent relief, they're saying we will defer the rent to a future point in time, and you will still owe it to us, and it will still be on our books. Okay, so you didn't really help me. You just moved the rent that I'm going to owe you next year. That's a rent relief. Rent abatement is what the lease coach goes after. When we approach the landlord, we're talking to them and saying, no, we want you to abate or forgive the next 3 months of rent. Okay? Because even if we get open in 6 weeks or 2 months, it's going to be a slow crawl back. People aren't going to come rushing through our front doors for martial arts classes when there's still this concern and they know people that have caught, COVID-19. It's going to be a slow crawl back in our front door. So we're going to need more time. Now, here's, at the very beginning of this conversation, one of the things I said to you is find out if the landlord has a plan. And here's why. If the landlord comes back and says, we're going to take 30% off your rent. That's how we're going to handle it. We're the landlord. We've got our own mortgage. We can't afford to give you 100% off. We're going to give you 30% off. A lot of tenants would just grab that. They'd say, okay, good. That's better than nothing. When I would go back thinking this is going to be multiple rounds of negotiation, and I would negotiate that 30% to about 70%. But because they already offered 30, we're only asking for 40 more. You see, we're not asking for 70, they've already given us 30. And that's a distinction you want to make. Everybody's getting 30, well, we need 70. So we're just asking for 40% more. Now, in reality, if a martial arts studio is closed for an entire month, then I would like to get them a 100% rent abatement. You know, how much of it, different landlords are going to have different numbers, and it's going to be negotiable. Tenants are going to make the mistake of not negotiating, not going enough rounds, and leaving too much on the table. Okay?
Specifically with the example of the discount, that's the first offer, and you never take the first offer.
Correct. But some of them will, John. Some of them will, because they'll just go, oh, well, that's better than nothing. I'll take it, right?
It is indeed. You know, so just as you explained, now the spread is 40%. So I've got 30. Let's go to work on that 40. So that's great advice there, Dale. That's really, really helpful. So to review, is there any more? We've got rent relief, rent abatement, and discounted offers.
Yes. Now, here's another twist that a lot of landlords are going to throw at a tenant. They're going to say, well, do you have a business loan? And the martial arts studio owner is going to say, yeah, I've got a business loan. And the landlord's going to say, well, have you asked the bank to forgive your interest and your loan payments? Because why should we be the only ones helping you? Franchise tenants have another handicap. The landlord will say to franchise tenants, are you getting a royalty reprieve from your franchisor? Because if your franchisor won't stop collecting royalties, why should we stop collecting rent? Right? If your bank won't stop collecting business loan payments, why should we stop collecting rent? And that will confuse these business owners, and they'll be thrown off for a couple of weeks while they're scrambling or trying to make something happen with their banker.
My sense is that my response is that's business that he and I are doing, or we're working that out. My focus is on this rent with you.
Right, but it will come down to this. Landlords are savvy enough that they will say, show me an email to your banker, show me a response from your banker, show me. They just won't take your word for it. And most martial arts studio owners are not fast enough on their feet. Like, they're not, to be able to address this. They're still emotionally wrapped up in it. They're still concerned they're going to lose their whole business. They're dealing with all the moms phoning for their money back. It's not a pretty sight. So let's talk about the length of the relief plan, the rent assistance plan. There's nothing wrong with month-to-month assistance. We don't know how long this is going to last. But at some point, this needs to be documented. So are you going to do up a new document every month? Are you going to do this by email? Some landlords will be casual. Some will be very formal. If you happen to be like a lot of martial arts school owners right now and you've got some rent arrears, there's a good chance the landlord will say, well, we're not going to help you until you get caught up on the money you owe us from the past months. Okay? At the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned that you have to be careful that you don't say to the landlord, help me or I'm going to go out of business, because the landlord is only going to help the tenants that the landlord believes want to stay in business, will fight to stay in business, will spend some of their own money to stay in business, and will come out the end in 6 months. They're not going, if you're barely able to pay your rent and you've been a rent collection problem for the landlord, they might not assist. They may decide, well, this is where the
relationship ends.
That's right. You're not going to come back from this. So why should we bother helping you now? Right. But they don't want your space back. That's not what this is about. There's no other tenants that want your space right now. So that's not the issue. In a normal economy, a landlord could say that. They could say, look, you're not paying your rent on time. Get out so we can put in a tenant who will.
That is so helpful.
Now, quite a few listeners, John, are in their renewal year. And I recommend that tenants approach their landlord a year in advance on renewals. If you are, within 18 months of your lease term expiring. This is not a bad time to bring that up and to reinforce that you want to stay in business. You plan to stay in business. I work for tenants in all different industries, and martial arts tenants are some of the worst when it comes to their accounting, the ability to produce a profit and loss statement, to show on paper what's actually happening. Okay. And depending on the martial arts instructor or owner, you might be doing a lot of the work inside. You may be paying yourself a very handsome salary because you're physically working in the business. You're the number one instructor, but on the books, you look like you're in the red. So if you go to the landlord and you say, well, I lost $30,000 last year, but I paid myself $160,000, they'll connect the dots. And so oftentimes I will have the tenant send me their P&L, and then I'll look at the P&L as if I was the old-time property manager that I was, right? And I'll say, well, look, this is going to set off a red flag. This is going to set off a red flag. You got 2 company cars you're paying for, and a bus for after school, and this is going to raise a red flag. And we talk through it because you have the ability to go back and, change some of this and massage it a little bit. But one other thing, John, there's going to be, when I was a property manager working for landlords, the landlord was not always truthful with me. The landlord would sometimes not tell me what was happening so that I had plausible deniability. So when the tenant is communicating with the property manager might be 100% sincere when he says, I'm getting a plan from the landlord on Friday. And then Friday comes and the landlord doesn't send him a plan. Right? I mean, he wasn't lying to you. He just couldn't deliver on what he was telling you. And so if you're communicating and negotiating with the property manager, you sometimes have to hold them accountable. So if he tells you on the phone he's going to have a plan for you on Friday, go do what I do. Go back to your laptop, send him an email and say, Bob, it was so good speaking with you today. Thanks for, talking to me, telling me this and this and this. You told me that Friday you're going to have a plan for me. I'll check back with you then if I don't hear from you, right? That doesn't represent an agreement between the two parties, but it documents that what you were told.
Absolutely. That's great advice, and over any kind of phone meeting, just confirm that we discussed this and we agreed on this and this and this.
I don't negotiate by email. I keep score by email.
I like that very much. Thanks.
Okay. So what we want to avoid is we want to avoid these martial arts studio owners, going to their landlord with a cup when they should have gone with a pail. There can be large rent assistance plans here if you can go the distance on the negotiation, and some of them frankly can't. So the demand is like we have a rate sheet of our services, our project packages for negotiating lease renewals and new leases. But we've created a new plan, John. So for $1,500, this is a special project. This is a rent assistance project. For $1,500, a martial arts studio owner can hire us to either coach them through this rent assistance plan, or for the same fee, we will reach out to the landlord directly and do the negotiating for them. This is all going to take place within 45 to 60 days, and it'll be settled, okay? But ideally, we've got you a rent reprieve or some form of rent relief or assistance for 6 to 18 months.
That is a true no-brainer. I'm on the hook for $3,000 rent on the first, and then $3,000 30 days later. Holy cow. Fantastic. So when does this launch?
This is up now. Remember, I've been doing this for a martial arts studio owner to contact me. This is a big decision. They've got to think this over a bit. But for me, it's just Tuesday.
Another day at the office.
Right? This is what I do. And so it's another day at the office for me, and that's exactly what you want to hear. I remember my wife talking about how she was so worried about going in for a root canal, and I said, the dentist isn't losing any sleep over this. He does them every day, right? Now, if John, if we get the deferral, the rent deferral, let's say the landlord will give 50% rent abatement and 50% rent relief. So they're expecting you to pay 50% back at some future point. We document to tack that on to the very end of the term so that when we come back and negotiate your lease renewal, we can negotiate for the landlord to waive that repayment. And we do that a lot because now if they want you to renew, they've got to waive that $8,000 that they gave you 2 years ago. Okay, so that's part of the. When we contact landlords, it's important to understand that we have a very calm demeanor. We're very politically correct. There's no fist pounding on the table. I've actually had to go to landlords. So I'll go to my client, and my client says, I can only pay 50% of my rent. I say, okay, write me a check for 50% of the rent and give me your spare keys. And I walk down to the property manager's office, and I very politely, with an apology, I say, I'm sorry I'm here. This is not a good circumstance, but I'm here. Would you like the keys back, or would you like a half a rent check? And they always take the half rent check.
That is so good. That's the voice of experience.
Yeah, but you have to deliver that with, I'm sorry this is happening. We really appreciate your help. We hope we can bounce back and pay you big rent in the future. Things like that. You want to give them the opportunity to say, well, we really helped our tenants.
Okay, so I'd like to get some specific questions here from members, and then we'll wrap this up. The first is from Patrick Overbay, and his question is, what specific effect does force majeure have on a lease, or a force majeure event? First off, what is force majeure?
When there's no controlling what happens, when the tenant couldn't be open if they wanted to because there was a climate disaster, or there was a war, that type of thing. Okay, so you're
act of God type thing.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Well, that's really an intelligent question. The wording of that clause is a little bit different from lease to lease. And so at the risk of sounding like anything but the expert, I'd have to read that clause to tell him what his says to him. Okay.
And he says, does it depend on the lease?
It does. It really varies. It really varies from lease to lease. Some leases don't even have that clause in if it's a real casual mom and pop landlord. But it's not going to be your escape route here. This is not going to be. Let me tell you one thing for sure. This is not the clause you're going to win the battle on.
And the next question is, would the virus be considered an act of God? I think that would come under the first question.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Judy Fleury, my friend, says, and you've answered this as well, how best to approach management about freezing rent during this time and what to do if they say no. We've just covered that for the last 30 minutes in detail. Outstanding. I've got one I don't think applies. It talks about what options are available for commercial property owners with mortgage loans. That sounds more like a loan or a bank situation with a loan mortgage.
It is, but I think the landlords are going to find it to be a fairly easy pitch with their banker, because most of let's say it's a $2 million property, which is a pretty small property. It's a $2 million plaza with 5 or 6 tenants. And the owner's got $1 million worth of equity, and they've got $1 million mortgage. The landlord's going to prop them up, because this is all going to pass and go away in 6 months. Okay, so the mortgage holder doesn't want the property back, and the landlord has enough equity in the property that they can borrow $100,000 to keep them going.
Gotcha. And that's the key point, the equity.
Yeah.
And this one actually is not from the U.S. This is from England, but I told him I'd ask just for any kind of input. He says that his neighboring tenant was told by her business advisor that if we don't pay the next 3 months' rent, the landlord can't do anything. But if we can't afford the next quarter in July and protection is lifted, in other words, the ban's lifted, the pandemic's over, then he has the right to evict. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, see, it is a little bit different in England, but and I can't comment on that for England, but for America, that's not the case. There may be some government assistance, but there's not going to be any government protection. Like if the landlord wants to kick you out, he can change your locks and fight you in court 5 months from now.
Oh, good point.
If he wants to, right? But that's not likely to happen. That's not likely to happen. If you have proper communication, it's going to be okay. But I don't think we should be expecting the government to come through with too much here, because there's just too many people that need too much help. It's going to be a it's going to be a Band-Aid when we needed a tourniquet.
Yeah, and it's unprecedented. It's really been something. And Dale, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these super important questions. I know of all the questions that are going through people's minds, our martial arts school owner members, this is the biggest. What am I going to do?
Terrific.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you again so much. And I'll probably do a follow-up at some point, and we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, John. Have a good day.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Are you still there?
Yes.
Okay. I want to promote this program you have. We had a 10% affiliate program a couple of years ago when James Theros was one of my referrals. So I'd like to get that going again somehow.
I like that.
Give you a presence on everything that we do.
I like that, John. And we can afford to do that because this is a service business. I'm not selling a widget. I'm selling a service.
Okay,
so I can afford to give that. And just before the call, I emailed you my bio and the picture and a few things you needed. So
great. Everything on the list. Outstanding. Well, I'll put some ideas together on that, and we'll get it rocking and rolling.
All right. I appreciate your time.
Dave, thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. I'd sure appreciate your comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe, share this with your friends, and leave a rave review, because nowhere else are you going to get the truth about the martial arts business than you will right here. Thanks.